Hello, and welcome to the 77th edition of Crossing Thin Ice, a podcast series about risk management for insurers. I'm Dave Ingram, and today, as always, I'm joined by Max Rudolph. Today's topic is the A in VUCA, ambiguity. It's when you get information that just isn't clear enough to make a confident decision. Like the weather forecast. There's a chance of rain today. Does that mean you take your umbrella or not? Before we start, I want to mention that nothing in today's podcast should be interpreted as investment advice, but it is sure to be educational and thought-provoking. Let's get started.
If we knew what was going to happen with 100% conviction, there'd be no need for sophisticated strategic planning, but decisions need to be made even when we have less certainty. That's where stress testing, scenario planning, and stochastic analysis provide information for decision makers. Information about the future is by definition incomplete and often contradictory or vague. This means more than one reasonable interpretation exists for our base assumptions due to demographics, technology, geopolitics, the environment, and economics. All are evolving and generating new trends. Where artificial intelligence, or AI, is going, and its direct and indirect impacts, provides a good example. Ethicists worry that AI will evolve to dominate society, reminding us of science fiction like The Matrix or 2001: A Space Odyssey. Others worry that AI will reach a level with only one geopolitical winner and are committed to their team being on top so they dominate the future. Ownership of copyrights and actors worry that plagiarism without compensation will ensue. Increasingly realistic deepfakes make it hard to know what to believe, challenging credibility of the underlying information. Workers worry their jobs will be eliminated with no obvious path forward to support their families, and recent counsel to learn to code now seems to have been poor guidance and weakened the stature of advisors. The war on terror and role of social media and misinformation are examples where public opinion can be manipulated in ways that are difficult to model. Multiple interpretations of the same input are common. When economic expectations are ambiguous, it can create winners and losers. That is expected in a capitalistic democracy where creative destruction is allowed to happen. But government actions that are ambiguous can lead to confusion. This happened as the COVID-19 pandemic played out, and poor communication combined with information designed to sow confusion until a variety of experts were providing conflicting advice on mandates and treatment. This led to additional deaths globally. Ambiguity increases as metrics become less reliable or unavailable. When information is not concrete and stable, communication should reflect that. For individuals, a doctor who says a treatment will lead to a positive outcome may indeed lead to that outcome. But comments made to the general public need to assume they will be challenged by those both expert and ignorant. How will ambiguity change in the future, and how can you anticipate it when providing information to decision makers? Modelers should continue to use stochastic modeling when that's possible, but decision makers are likely to view that as increasing ambiguity rather than clarifying. Results from stochastic models can be ranked in representative scenarios presented to management teams with a story attached. This encourages focus on specific outcomes. A model will help determine what risks need to be hedged and which should be expanded. Perfection is not possible, but providing a variety of potential outcomes can prove useful. A scenario may not pick out the future exactly, but it's amazing how often stressing one risk can anticipate the impact of another outcome. I used to provide analysis of interest rate spikes for small business owners and found that it also gave reasonable results for other risks, including creditor defaults. Many of these risks can be described as mean reverting risks, historical risks that cycle and eventually reappear. Some I worry about going forward are terrorism and stagflation. Each would prove very disruptive. Those who prepare today are likely to be the long-term winners in an ambiguous world.
All right, well, thank you very much for that, Max. I've got a lot of questions. That's a really interesting topic. Let me just start with this one. What are the potential downsides that you see of efforts that we might take to reduce ambiguity?
Well, you never have all the information you want to make a decision. That's just a fact. You have to manage expectations so your boss or client can make decisions based on their own internal and external constraints. Most young investors have the benefit of running stock portfolios on paper before they have actual cash to invest. They may have done quite well using academic tools, but when they need to send their own hard earned cash to buy something, they freeze with paralysis analysis. What if the price goes down further? Should I wait? If I'm buying this, what's the argument to sell by the person on the other side of the trade? You can just drive yourself nuts with some of this analysis. If you decide to go forward with a new product and it doesn't work, you and perhaps others will be fired. If it does well, you may be rewarded with a promotion and higher income. What should I do? Do I have time to complete a full stochastic analysis, or should I selectively pick out a few scenarios to test and rely on that information? You need to balance both cost and time constraints, with thought given to the marginal benefit of each. If you have loose constraints or a mathematical model that runs quickly, you can run scenarios until the decision doesn't change much, like an optimizer function. Note that this does not mean the results don't change, just that the decision based on the results doesn't change. An example would be a decision to hedge or not. Time is another constraint that can act as a boundary condition. For example, think of the manager of a baseball team. They must turn in a lineup prior to a game. For a given position, they are constrained by the players on the roster, metrics that serve as leading indicators for their potential performance, and time. I use the best information about skill sets, matchups, injuries, and team chemistry based on what I know at the time. I can make up lists of pros and cons all day long, but eventually I run out of time and have to submit the lineup. A third strategy is to decide based on the least bad outcome, satisficing, trying to reduce my regret. Would I rather miss a large opportunity because I let a competitor get there first, or move quickly and have discrepancies between actual to expected? Dave, do you have any examples you want to share?
A couple come to mind, Mac. First, I wanted to just reinforce what you said there about satisficing. The satisficing just kind of describes the process that we're all forced into all the time, because there are very few situations where there's not some ambiguity to the information we're getting. We do run into a time constraint. The time comes when we need to make a decision. Often, some of the companies I work with make those decisions by just letting the time run out, like killing the clock. They pass the time for the decision, and therefore they don't have to actively make it. The downside concerns here go to those famous biases that a lot of folks have studied. There's two of those that I can think of. One is the recency bias, where we give higher weight to things we've heard recently. There's confirmation bias, where we give higher weight to things that confirm what we already thought. And there's also availability bias. We have to be careful that we're not falling victim to those kind of biases. That those are the downsides that I see that we should pay attention to in this. I've got more questions, Max. Given the ability to stress test, when and how do you balance cost and time constraints against the idea of trying to make the best decision?
Yeah, this is one of the great challenges of any undertaking. I can come up with an unlimited number of stress tests, but at some point, the marginal value of doing another one becomes negative. At that point, I need to stop. But can I, as an analyst, identify that point, or do I need outside input? It's easy to become paralyzed by data, especially with the new opportunity where it's not yet clear which scenario sets clarify decisions, the signal, and which are just random noise. Another challenge is inertia. I'll just keep doing the same thing I did before. I view this as an opportunity cost, and any changes must outperform either with higher returns or lower risk. That's another balancing act, but we've discussed that one before. Momentum may also be the preferred option by senior managers, and in that case, it's often your job to provide alternatives to the status quo. Some tactics to get past inertia include leading indicators that traditionally have reduced ambiguity, focusing on next steps rather than grand goals, and allowing people close to the data to make reversible decisions. These include tasks such as performing research on industry successes.
You noted that decision makers may view stochastic modeling as increasing ambiguity. How would you clarify data using examples and stories rather than those stochastic models?
Yeah, a stochastic set of hundreds or even thousands of scenarios creates a large amount of information. It's too much to expect senior management or your board to review it all based on their skill sets and time constraints. I always start with a picture, generally ranking results from worst to best or comparing actual to expected. Then I might compare the results to a pre-established constraint tied to risk tolerance, identifying results that the company views as unsuitable. A single solvency event risk might be enough to decide even to avoid the risk, but generally a picture can help to develop a hedging strategy to separate acceptable and unacceptable results. Beyond this, I like to identify specific problem scenarios and develop a narrative or story to describe the issue and identification in ways that are actionable. For example, a specific level of interest rates, high or low, may trigger more analysis, like a yellow light in a red, yellow, green status assessment. An initial trigger may be followed by potential bigger events that can define an ongoing scenario. A rising unemployment trend may trigger fiscal and monetary policy loosening that leads to stagflation and credit losses in a portfolio. A narrative may describe future actions as well. Adding to the previous example, the credit losses will reduce available surplus and halt capital allocation to new ventures until the situation improves. The narrative may also include potential hedges. A reinsurer might buy protection against a location-specific hurricane in the capital markets if it has recently added risk exposure tied to that location. Narrative scenario sets can also be used to define specific stress tests. Rather than include 100 scenarios, a few can be identified to represent the scenario set. We see this in the IPCC climate scenarios, where the 5 levels of greenhouse gas emissions are mapped to specific environmental results that can be used for building out economic and geopolitical scenarios. The narrative scenario tells a story that's relatable to the non-expert, which builds up credibility for the presenter as well, since they become viewed as strong communicators. Dave, do you have anything to add on this question?
Yeah, I can just relate that I do remember the very first time I was able to work on a stochastic model for a client. I was very disappointed because they wanted to focus in on one point. I don't remember which point it was, maybe the 99th percentile or something. And so I wanted to look at the scenarios clustered around that particular 99th percentile scenario and see if I could give them any insight as to what was causing the issues that would be that loss that they were so focused on at that 99th percentile, and found absolutely no useful actionable information from doing that the scenarios were totally all over the place, that they were every combination possible of a high loss here, a medium loss there, a low loss in a third driver. As I've done a lot more of this work, I've come to wonder whether that whole process takes into account well enough the ways in which sometimes the loss events will act as multipliers, as you often say, Max, to the severity of the situation.
Yeah, I often get into threat multipliers, but as I'm seeing the term become more commonly used, I'm seeing people call it force multipliers, which gives it a two-sided result. And so I kind of like that view of it as well.
Next question, Max. Risk can be categorized in one of 3 categories: mean reverting, evolving, or new risks. How does strategy shift when preparing for a risk that has no historical precedent?
Yeah, I heard once that a video game maker took their staff to a local brewery for periodic creative thinking events. I really like that idea. I find that getting away from my routine on vacation or at a conference always seemed to stimulate ideas for me. These examples serve as as an important reminder that we have to leave our comfort zone to generate out-of-the-box thinking. Trying to come up with potential black swan events is hard. Not everyone can do it. I'm not good at it. So I scan magazines who do a better job and follow others I have discovered to be creative thinkers. I would include Roger Lowenstein, Peter Brannon, Howard Marks, Timothy Snyder, and Jim Grant on that list. For the easiest tasks, historical data is both known and predictive. It's a known known, but results may also be mean reverting over time using a historical distribution of results. When interest rates were negative in Europe and low in the US a few years ago, it seemed likely that they would mean revert. What investor, unless inflation was negative, would invest in low yielding assets? Models can estimate how quickly they will revert and then use the historical data. Few models reflect the likelihood that results will overshoot, as this requires too much alignment with other assumptions. Pandemics would be another example, with similar probabilities across centuries, but independence between events, so after long periods of quiet, we become sure that this time is different. These risks can often be hedged or transferred by the risk owner. Other risks evolve, but a modeler can estimate changes using trends. Most global warming risks, such as wildfires and hurricanes, have met this criterion so far. These are unknown knowns, where historical results are not predictive, but can be modified to anticipate a range of future outcomes. Known unknowns are difficult to model, but qualitatively can be discussed since we know in advance about risk events. Examples would include the results of artificial intelligence and the results of climate tipping points that cause discontinuities. It's hard to describe a new emerging risk since by definition it's something that has not been seen before. Prior to recent research, I might have included a stoppage of ocean currents like the AMOC, but now that should be on a risk manager's radar. I worry about acidification of the oceans or the unintended downside of having so many satellites in orbit. Note that these are not black swans, which are highly unpredictable, rare occurrences with massive, widespread consequences that, in hindsight, people try to rationalize as if it could have been foreseen. We think we are so smart that we could not have possibly missed something. That doesn't describe any of us. Stay humble. Dave, you've likely interacted with Nassim Taleb, who wrote Black Swan and my preferred book, Fooled by Randomness, more than any other actuary. Is there anything you'd like to add from your experiences?
I never heard Nassim ever say that he predicted any particular black swan event happening, and his genius there was in describing the whole phenomena. One of the phrases, I don't think it's in either of those books, it might be in one of his later books, the idea of the importance of skin in the game, in terms of who you should be paying attention to. You should be paying attention to people that are actually putting their money on the line with their predictions, as opposed to the people that are just making predictions and getting paid for making predictions. I think his main point in those books was that we don't know what's going to happen, but something bad's going to happen. And that the market almost always underprices that. The example to that seems really clear in my mind was a company presentation on their variable annuity business before the financial crisis, where they bragged about the fact that they had tested their hedging program to a 20% drop in the stock market. Peak to trough, the stock market dropped 50% in the financial crisis. On a calendar year basis, it was something like 37%. So their 20% stress test was inadequate. And in fact, they were among the insurance companies that had to be bailed out.
Yeah, living here in Omaha, yeah, as you know, I tend to follow Berkshire Hathaway quite closely. And Charlie Munger, before he passed, would say frequently that in his lifetime that Berkshire, one of the biggest and most profitable companies in history, it had 50% corrections 3 times during his career. So yeah, 20% seems extreme, but given historical results, probably isn't.
Yeah, I remember after the financial crisis going around and asking a number of actuaries what their stochastic model had a drop of 37%. What probability would have assigned to it, and it seemed like the median answer was about 1 in 250. The actual historical record of the stock market, as it had been recreated by a couple of different folks, would suggest that did happen 3 times in the last century, not in Charlie Munger's memory, but for
Well, he
the.
lived to be 100, so it's similar.
So maybe he was claiming credit for things that happened while he was in diapers. But anyway, let's keep going. I think I've got at least one more question I'd like to try out on you, Mac. Technology. You mentioned AI a little bit there in your discussion there. Technology creates ambiguity about job prospects over a career. What can a new graduate do to manage this risk, do you think?
Yeah, this topic's being asked by every graduating student. They just spent 4 or more years specializing in one topic or getting a broad liberal arts degree designed to develop a thinking process. Many were told a few years ago that coding was a foolproof way to get a job in any environment. But now artificial intelligence is showing signs of being able to do these tasks 24/7 for a mostly fixed cost. What should they do? This is a great topic, and there certainly are multiple answers. I don't have the unique best answer. My personal experience, I'm a credentialed life actuary and CFA charter holder with undergraduate math and business degrees. So I have a broad technical background with the ability to do deep dives on specific subjects, as shown in the research projects that I've done. This background helps me to think about interactions between risks and events, but often I am too early to recognize an event and miss out on initial gains. That's my process, and it works for me. My interest in the enterprise part of enterprise risk management allows me, after years of continual learning, to humbly provide foresight. When you hear someone speak or read their essays, I encourage you to avoid focusing on how they say something. My sentences tend to be long, and sometimes my mind moves faster than my mouth, but I communicate the way I want to learn. I want to add to an existing knowledge base, not start from scratch and duplicate pre-existing ideas. I've always told anyone asking my advice to listen to everyone, but develop your own process that can be modified as you gain experience and learn new things. As I worked up the corporate ladder, I found the most interesting way to view my job was to find ways to eliminate my position. I did that several times, and there was always something more interesting on the other side. I'm supportive of job rotations when an employee is young in order to learn different aspects of a company. This builds a network and provides flexibility in future roles. You may be surprised that you like to work in customer service role or as an auditor. This experience is especially useful if you make it to the C-suite. An ERM job, where you get to interact with many types of risk exposure and many parts of a company, can be a key component of this. A number of people who worked in my unit went on to manage specific product lines very successfully. It's one of the things I'm most proud of as a supervisor. As part of an ERM process, I encourage a company to internally publish a glossary of terms that they use. This makes it easier to move freely between jobs and lowers the chance of miscommunications. This will need to be updated periodically with a view to include industry consistent terms and keep up with recent technology changes and product evolutions. So good luck to all the new graduates, and hopefully they can find a timeline and a process that works for them as their career unfolds. Dave, your career has been even longer than mine. What would you like to add on this topic?
Well, I've got a couple ideas on this, Max. The big idea I have is that one of the things that the young folks need to somehow or other get on a faster track to developing is judgment. Right now, at least, there's very little chance you can get good judgment out of an AI system. It's just not something that is likely there, because good judgment is all about ambiguity and uncertainty. It's about being able to come up with a decision in that satisficing process where you just haven't been able to have the time to do all the analysis that you could possibly think of to do, and you just have to make the decision now. It's with your judgment you make that decision. I'm not sure at this point exactly how to develop that. It's a project I have on my list for next year to work with a number of folks to try and develop that. As a second way of saying maybe the same thing, I have a short list of things that folks, including young folks and more experienced folks, actuaries should be looking at now, is expanding their thought palette. I think we all ought to expand in social sciences, understanding how people work. The stuff that I've talked about many times that I've learned from anthropology, in the anthropology specialty of plural rationalities, have been extremely helpful to me in doing risk management work. And I think that whether it's that or the bias work from psychology or other things, that we can all take up some social science information. Systems analysis, the idea of looking at these complex systems that are fundamental part of our VUCA world, is something that we could all add to our toolkit as well. Actuaries have a particularly strong emphasis on ethics already, and I think that's another thing that will be of higher and higher value in a world with AI, because AI fundamentally does not have ethics. And so you need somebody looking at them. And in our case, the ethical principles that actuaries are most connected to is the idea of long-term solvency. We're the ones in the room who are paying attention to whether or not this actually works if we continue it. And then the fourth topic that we ought to become even better at is creativity. Many of us have done a lot of creative work in solving the actuarial problems. I think we can expand our creativity there. Many of us do it in a very much a seat of the pants kind of ad hoc way. There are ways to do creativity in a systematic way that we ought to learn and be able to use that facility. What it really means is we ought to become more human. And less like the computer, and because I think that AI is going to take over all the tasks that are more computer-like.
Yeah, it's like we've talked about before, that the working with AI as opposed to having teams of just people or just AI seems to give the best results. So figuring out ways to use judgment to build off of AI as a tool, I think is a really good strategy to have at this point in time.
So that was our discussion of the fourth element of VUCA, ambiguity. Along with volatility, uncertainty, and complexity, they're perhaps both what makes our jobs as risk managers secure and at the same time frustrating. We hope you've enjoyed this edition of Crossing Thin Ice, and if you did, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Thanks. Bye.